The Stockbroker's Clerk. Shortly after my marriage, I bought a connection in the Paddington district. Old Mr. Farquhar, whom I had purchased it, had at one time an excellent general practice, but his age and an affliction of the nature of St. Victus dance, from which he had suffered, had very much thinned it. The public not unnaturally goes on the principle that he who would heal others must himself be whole, and looks askance at the curative powers of those whose own case is beyond the reach of his drugs. Thus my predecessor weakened his practice, declined, until when I purchased it from him it had sunk from 1,200 to a little more than 300 a year. I had confidence, however, in my own youth and energy, and was convinced that in a very few years the concern would be as flourishing as ever. For 3 months after taking over the practice, I was kept very closely at work and saw little of my friend Sherlock Holmes, for I was too busy to visit Baker Street, and he seldom went anywhere himself save upon the professional business. I was surprised, therefore, when one morning in June, as I sat reading the British Medical Journal after breakfast, I heard a ring at the bell, followed by high, somewhat strident tones of my old companion's voice. "Ah, my dear Watson," said he, striding into the room, "I am very delighted to see you. I trust that Mrs. Watson is entirely recovered from the little excitements connected with our adventure of the Sinophore." "Thank you, we are both very well," I said, shaking him warmly by the hand. "And I hope also," he continued, sitting down by the rocking-chair, "that the cares of medical practice have not entirely obliterated the interest you used to have in our little detective problems." "On the contrary," I answered. "It was only last night I was looking over my old notes and classifying some of our past results." "I trust that you don't consider our collection closed." "Not at all. I should wish nothing better to have much more of some experiences." "Today, for example?" "Yes, today, if you like." "And as far off as Birmingham?" "Certainly, if you wish it." "And the practice?" "I do my neighbour's when he goes. He is always ready to work off the debt." "Ha! Nothing could be better," said Holmes, leaning back in his chair and looking keenly at me from under his half-closed lids. "I perceive that you have been unwell lately. Summer colds are always a little trying." "I was confined to the house with severe chill for 3 days last week. I thought, however, that I had cast off every trace of it." "So you have. You look remarkably robust." "How, then, did you know of it?" "My dear fellow, I have my methods." "You deduce it?" "Certainly." "And from what?" "From your slippers." I glanced down at the new patent leathers which I was wearing. "How on earth—" I began, but Holmes answered my questions before it even ended. "Your slippers are new," he said. "You could not have had them for more than a few weeks. The soles which you are at this moment presenting to me are the slightest scorched. For a moment I thought they may have got wet and been burning in the drying. But near the instep there is a small circular wafer of paper with the Schumann's hieroglyphs written upon it. Damp would, of course, have removed this. You had, then, been sitting with your feet outstretched by the fire, which a man would hardly do even in so wet a June as this has been if he were in full health." Like all Holmes's reasoning, the thing seemed simplicity itself, when it was at once explained. He read the thought upon the features, and his smile had a tinge of bitterness. "I am afraid that I rather give myself away when I explain," said he. "Results without causes are much more impressive. You are ready to come to Birmingham, then?" "Certainly. What is the case?" "You shall hear it all on the train. My client is outside in a four-wheeler. Can you come at once?" "In an instant." I scribbled a note to my neighbour, rushed upstairs to explain the matter to my wife, and joined Holmes upon the doorstep. "Your neighbour is a doctor?" he said, nodding at the brass plate. Yes, he brought the package as I did. An old established one. Just the same as mine. Both have been ever since the houses were built. Ah, then you got hold of one of the best of the two. I think I did, but how did you know? By the steps, my boy. Yours are worn 3 inches deeper than his. But the gentleman on the cab isn't my client, Mr. Hall Pycroft. Allow me to introduce you to him. Whip your horse up, cabby, for we have only just time to catch our train. The man whom I found myself facing was a well-built, fresh-complexioned young fellow, with a frank, honest face and a crisp, slight yellow mustache. He wore a very shiny top hat and a neat suit of sober black, which made him look what he was, a smart young city man, of the class whom we have labelled cockneys, but who give us a crack volunteer regiment and who turn out more fine athletes and sportsmen than any body of men in these islands. His round, ruddy face was naturally full of cheeriness, but the corners of his mouth seemed to me to be pulled down as half-comical distress. It was not, however, until we were in the first-class carriage, as well as started upon our journey to Birmingham, that I was able to learn what the trouble was at which he had been driven to Sherlock Holmes. "We have a clear run here for 70 minutes," Holmes remarked. "I want you, Mr. Hall Pycroft, to tell my friend your very interesting experience exactly as you have told it to me, with more detail if possible. It will be of use to me to hear the succession of events again. It is the case, Watson, which may prove to have something in it, or may prove to have nothing, but which, at least, presents those unusual and ultra features which we are dear to you as they are to me. Now, Mr. Pycroft, I shall not interrupt you again." Our young companion looked at me with a twinkle in his eye. "The worst of the stories," he said, "that I show myself up to such a confounded fool. Of course, it may work out all right, but I don't see that it could have done any better otherwise. But if I have lost my crib and get nothing of exchange, I shall feel what a soft Johnny I've been. I'm not very good at telling a story, Dr. Watson, but it is like this with me. I used to have a billet at Coxon and Woodhouse's of Draper Gardens, and they were let in the early of spring through the Venezuelan loan, as no doubt you remember, and came at a nasty copper. I've been with them 5 years, and old Croxon gave me a ripping good testimonial when the smash came. But of course, we clerks were all turned adrift, about 27 of us. I tried here and there, and there were lots of other chaps on the same lay as myself, and it was a perfect frost for a long time. I had been taking £3 a week at Croxon's, and I had saved about 70 of them, but as soon as I worked my way through that and out at the other end, I was fairly at the end of my tether at last, and could hardly find the stamps to answer the advertisements or the envelopes to stick to them. I had worn out my boots paddling the office stairs, and I'd seemed just as far from getting a billet as ever. Unless I saw a vacancy at Watson's and Williams, the great stockbroking firm in Lombard Street. I dare say E.C. is not much of your line, but I can tell that this is the richest house in London. The advertisement was to be answered by letter only. I sent in my testimonial and application, but without the least hope of getting it. Back came an answer by return, saying that if I would appear the next Monday, I might take over my new duties at once, provided that my appearance was satisfactory. No one knows how these things are worked. Some people say that the manager just plunges his hand into a heap and takes out the first that comes. Anyhow, it was my innings that time, and I don't wish to feel ever better pleased. The screw was £1 a week rise, and the duties were about the same as the Croxons. And now I come out of the queer part of the business. I was in Dickings' Hampstead way, 17 Potter's Terrace, Well, I was sitting doing a smoke that evening after I'd been promised the appointment, when up came my landlady with a card which said Arthur Penner, Financial Agent, printed on it. I had never heard of the name before and could not imagine what he wanted with me. But, of course, I asked her to show him up, and he walked, a middle-sized, dark, black-bearded man with a touch of the sheeny about his nose. He had a brisk kind of way with him and spoke sharply like a man who knew the value of time. "Mr. Highpolcreef, I believe," said he. "Yes, sir," I answered, pushing the chair towards him. "Lately engaged at Coxon and Woodhouse's?" "Yes, sir." "And now on staff at Mawson's?" "Quite so." "Well," said he, "the fact is that I have heard some rather extraordinary stories about your financial ability. You remember Parker, who used to be Coxon's manager? He can never say enough about it." Of course, I was pleased to hear this. I had always been pretty sharp in the office, but I had never dreamed that I was talked about in the city in this fashion. "You have a good memory," said he. "Pretty fair," I answered modestly. "Have you kept in touch with the market while you've been out of work?" he asked. "Yes, I read the stock exchange list every morning." "Now that shows real application," he said. "That is the way to prosper. You won't mind me testing you, will you? Let me see. How are the shares?" 106 1/4 to 105 7/8. And New Zealand Consolidated, 104. And the British Broken Hills, 7 to 7/6. "Wonderful!" he cried as his hands up. "This quite fits in with all that I'd heard. My boy, you are very much too good to be a clerk at Mawson's." The outburst rather astonished me, as you think. "Well," said I, "other people don't think quite so much of me as you might seem to do, Mr. Pinner. I had a hard enough fight to get this berth, and I'm very glad to have it." "Poor man, you should soar above it. You're not in your true sphere. Now I'll tell you how it stands with me. What I have to offer is little enough when measured by your ability, but when compared to Mawson's, it's light to dark. Let me see. When do you go at Mars?" "On Monday." "Ha ha! I would think I would risk a little sprout of flooding like you don't go there at all." "Not go to Mawson's?" "No, sir. By that day you will be the business manager of Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited, with 134 branches in the towns and villages of France, not counting the one in Brussels and one in San Remo." This took my breath away. "I never heard of it," said I. "Very likely not. It has been kept very quiet, for the capital was all privately subscribed, and it's too good a thing to promote in public in. My brother, Harry Piner, is a promoter, and he joins the board after allotment to managing manager. He knew I was in swim down here, and asked me to pick up a few good men cheap. A young pushing man with plenty of snap about him. Parker spoke of you, and that brought me here tonight. We can only offer you a beggarly 500 to start with." "500 a year!" I shouted. "Only at the beginning. But you have to have an overriding commission and 1% on all business done by our agents, and you may take my word for it that this will come to more than your salary." "But I know nothing about hardware." "Tut, my boy, you know about figures." My head buzzed. I could hardly sit still in my chair, but suddenly a little chill of doubt came upon me. "I must be frank with you," said I. "Mawson only gives me 200, but Mawson is safe. Now, really, I know so little about your company that—" "Ah, smart, smart!" he cried in a kind of ecstasy of delight. "You're the very man for us. You're not to be talked over, and quite right, too. Now, here's a note for £100, and if you think that we can do business, you may just slip up in your pocket and as an advance upon your salary." "That is very handsome," said I. "When shall I take over my new duties?" Be in Birmingham tomorrow at 1, he said. I have a note in my pocket here that says you will take it to my brother. You will find him at 126B Corporation Street, where the temporary offices of the company are situated. Of course, he must confirm your engagement, but between ourselves, it will be all right. Really, I hardly know how to express my gratitude, Mr. Pinus, said I. Oh, not at all, my boy. You have only got your deserts. There will be one or two small things, mere formalities, which I must arrange with you, but you have a pen of paper beside you. Kindly write upon it, I am perfectly willing to act as business manager for the Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited at the minimum salary of £500. Well, I did as asked, and he put the paper in his pocket. There's one other detail, he said. What do you intend to do about Mawson's? I'd forgotten all about Mawson's in my joy. I'll write and resign, said I. Precisely what I don't want you to do. I had a row over you with Mawson's manager. I'd gone up to ask him about you, and he was very offensive, accusing me of coaxing you away from the service of the firm. And, that sort of thing. I fairly lost my temper. You want good men, you should pay them a good price, said I. He would rather have our small price than your big one, he said. Good, that's a promise, said he, rising from his chair. Well, I'm delighted to have got so good a man for my brother. Here's your advance of £100, and here's the letter. Make a note of the address, 126 Corporation Street, and remember that 1 o'clock tomorrow is your appointment. Good night, and may you have all the fortune that you deserve. That's just about all passed between us as near as I can remember. You can imagine, Dr. Watson, how pleased I was at such an extraordinary bit of good fortune. I sat up half the night. 26B was a passage between two large shops, which led in a winding stone stair, and from which there were many flats. Led as offices, companies, and professional men. The names of the occupants were painted on the bottom of the wall, but there was no such name as Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited. I stood for a few minutes with my heart in my boots, wondering whether the whole thing was an elaborate hoax or not, when up came a man and addressed me. He was very like the chap I had seen the night before, the same figure and voice, and he was clean shaven and his hair was lighter. Are you Mr. Hogg Pycroft? He asks. Yes, said I. Oh, I was expecting you, but you are a trifle before your time. I had a note from my brother this morning in which he sang your praises very loudly. I was just looking at the other offices when you came. We have not got our name up yet, for we only secured the temporary premises last week. Come up with me, and we'll talk the matter over. I followed him right to the top of the lofty stair, and right under the slates were a couple of empty, dusty little rooms, uncarpeted and uncurtained, and to which he led me. I thought of a great office with shining tables and rows of clerks, such as I was used to, and I dare say I stared rather straight into the two deal chairs and one little table, which had a ledger and a wastepaper basket made up of the whole furniture. Don't be disheartened, Mr. Pycroft, said my new acquaintance, seeing at the length of my face. Rome was not built in a day, and we have lots of money at our backs, though we don't cut much dash in offices. Pray sit down and let me have your letter. I gave it to him, and he read it over very carefully. You seem to have made a vast impression upon my brother Arthur, said he. I now know that he is a little pretty shrewd judge. He swears by London, you know, and I by Birmingham. But this time I shall follow his advice. Pray consider yourself definitely engaged. What are my duties? I asked. You will eventually manage a great depot in France, which will pour a flood of English crockery into the shops of 134 agents in France. The purchase will be completed in a week, and meanwhile you'll remain in Birmingham and make yourself useful. How? For answer, he took a big red book out of the drawer. This is the directory of Paris, said he, with the trades after the names of the people. I want you to take it home with you and mark off all the hardware sellers with their addresses. It would be of greatest use to me to have them. Surely they're classified lists, I suggested. Not reliable ones. Their system is different from ours. Stick at it, and let me have the list by Monday at 12. Good day, Mr. Pycroft. If you continue to show zeal and intelligence, you will find the company a good master. I went back to the hotel with the big book under my arm and very conflicting feelings about my breast. On one hand, I was definitely engaged and had £100 in my pocket. On the other, the look of the offices, the absence of the name on the wall, and the other of the points which would strike a businessman that left bad impressions in the position of his employers. However, come that night, I had the money, so I settled down to my task. All Sunday I was hard at work, and yet by Monday I'd only got as far as H. I went round to my employer, found him at the same dismantled kind of room, and was told to keep at it until Wednesday, and then come again. On Wednesday it was still unfinished, so I hammered away until Friday, that is, yesterday. Then I brought it round to Mr. Harry Primer. Thank you very much, said he. I fear that I underrated the difficulty of the task. This list will be a very material assistance to me. It took some time, said I. And now, said he, I want you to make a list of the furniture shops, for they all sell crockery. Ouch. Very good. And you can come up tomorrow evening at 7 and let me know how you're getting on. Don't overwork yourself. A couple hours a day Sherlock Holmes rubbed his hands with delight, and I stared in astonishment at our client. You may well look surprised, Dr. Watson, but it is this way, said he. When I was speaking to the other chap in London, at the time that he laughed at my not going to Mawson's, I happened to notice that his tooth was stuffed in this very identical fashion. The glint of the gold in each of the case caught my eye, you see. When I put that with the voice and figure being the same, the only thing altered might have been changed by a razor or a wig. I could not doubt that it was the same man. Of course, you might expect two brothers to look alike, but not that way. They should not have the same tooth filled the same way. He bowed me out, and I found myself in the street, hardly knowing whether I was on my head or my heels. Back I went to the hotel and put my head in the basin of cold water and tried to think it out. Why had he sent me from London to Birmingham? Why had he got there before me? And why had he written a letter about himself to himself? It was altogether too much for me, and I could make no sense of it. Then suddenly it struck me that what was so dark might be very light to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I had just the time to get in town and night train to see you this morning, and bring you back with me to Birmingham. There was a pause after the stockbroker's clerk had concluded his surprising experience. Then Sherlock Holmes cocked his eye at me, leaning back on the cushions with a pleased and yet critical face, like a connoisseur who has just taken his first sip of a Comet vintage. Rather fine, Watson, is it not? Said he. And there are points in which pleases me. I think that you are agree with me that the interview from Mr. Arthur Harry Pinner in the temporary offices of the Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited would be a rather interesting experience for us both. But how can we get it? I asked. Oh, easily enough, said Hall Parcroft cheerily. You two are friends of mine who are in want of a billet, and what could be more natural than that I should bring you both round to our managing director? Quite so, of course, said Holmes. I should like to have a look at the gentleman and see if I can make anything of his little game. What qualities have you, my friend, which would make your services so valuable? Or is it possible that... He began biting his nails and staring blankly out the window. We hardly drew another word from him until we were at New Street. At 7 o'clock that evening we were walking, the three of us, down Corporation Street to the company's offices. There's no use of your being here before our time, said our client. He only comes there to see me, apparently, for the place is deserted up to the very hour he names. That is suggestive, remarked Holmes. By Jove, I told you so, cried the clerk. That's he walking ahead of us. He pointed to a smallish, dark, well-dressed man who was bustling along the other side of the road. As we watched him, he looked across at the boy who was bawling to put out the latest edition of the evening paper and running over among the cabs and buses. He bought one from him. Then, clutching at his hand, he vanished through the doorway. There he goes, cried Pycroft. There are the company's offices, to which he's gone. Come with me, and I'll fix up as easily as possible. Following his lead, we ascended 5 stories until we found ourselves outside the half-open door, at which our client was trapped. The voice within bade us enter, and we entered a bare, unfurnished room which was as Hall Pycroft had described. At a single table sat a man whom we had seen in the street, with his evening paper spread out in front of him, and as he looked up at us, he seemed to me that I had never looked upon a face which bore such marks of grief, or of something beyond grief, of a horror such as comes in few men in a lifetime. His brow glistened with perspiration, his cheeks were the dull, dead white of a fish's belly, and his eyes were wild and staring. He looked at his clerk as though he failed to recognize him, and I could see by the astonishment depicted upon our conductor's face that this was by no means the usual appearance of his employer. You look ill, Mr. Pinner, he exclaimed. Yes, I'm not very well, answered the other, making obvious efforts to pull himself together and licking his dry lips before he spoke. Who are these gentlemen whom you have brought with us? One is Mr. Harris of Bermondsey, and the other is Mr. Price of this town, said our clerk glibly. They're friends of mine and gentlemen of experience, but they have been out of the place for some time, and they hope that perhaps you might find an opening for them in the company's employment. Very possibly, cried Mr. Plummer with a ghastly smile. Yes, I have no doubt that we shall be able to do something for you. What is your peculiar line, Mr. Harris? I'm an accountant, said Holmes. Ah, yes, we shall want something of the sort. And you, Mr. Price? A clerk, said I. I have every hope that the company may accommodate you, and I will let you know about it as soon as we come to any conclusion. And now I beg that you will go. For God's sake, leave me to myself. These last words were shot out of him as though the constraint which he was evidently setting upon himself had suddenly and utterly burst asunder. Holmes and I glanced at each other, and Hall Pycroft took a step towards the tables. You forget, Mr. Pinner, that I am here by appointment to receive some directions from you, said he. Certainly, Mr. Pycroft, certainly. The other assumed a calmer turn. You may wait here a moment, and there is no reason why your friend should not wait with you. I will be entirely at your service in 3 minutes, if I might trespass upon your patience so far. He rose with a very courteous air, and bowing to us, passed out through the door at the farther end of the room, which he closed behind him. Now what? Whispered Holmes. Is he giving us the slip? Impossible, answered Pycroft. Why so? That door leads to an inner room. There is no exit? None? Is it furnished? It was empty yesterday. Then what on earth can he be doing? There's something which I don't understand in this matter. If ever a man was 3 parts mad with terror, that man's name is Piner. What can he have had puts the shivers on him? He suspects that we are detectives, I suggested. That's it, cried Pryor. Holmes shook his head. He did not turn pale. He was pale when we entered the room. It was possible that... His words were interrupted by a sharp rat-tat from the other direction of the other door. What the deuce is he knocking on his own door for? Cried the clerk. Again, a much louder rat-tat-tat. We all gazed expectantly at the closed door. Glancing at Holmes, I saw his face turn rigid, and he leaned forward in intense excitement. Then suddenly came a low gargling sound, and a brisk drumming upon woodwork. Holmes sprang frantically across the room and pushed at the door. It was fastened from the inner side. Following his example, we threw ourselves upon it with all our weight. One hinge snapped, then the other, and down came the door with a crash. Rushing over, we found ourselves in the inner room. But it was empty. But it was only for a moment that we were at fault. At one corner, the corner nearest the room which we had left, there was a second door. Holmes sprang to it and pulled it open. A coat and waistcoat were lying on the floor, and from a hook behind the door, with his own braces around his neck, was hanging the managing director of Franco Midland Hardware Company. His knees were drawn up, his head hung at a dreadful angle to his body, and the clatter of his heels against the door made the noise which had broken upon our conversation. In an instant I had caught him around the waist and held him up while Holmes and Pycroft untied the elastic bands which had disappeared between the livid creases of his skin. Then we carried him into the other room, where he lay with a clay-colored face, puffing his purple lips in and out with every breath, a dreadful wreck of all that had been for 5 minutes before. What do you think of him, Watson? Asked Holmes. I stooped over him and examined him. His pulse was feeble and intermittent, but his breathing grew stronger, and there was a little shivering of the eyelids, which showed a little thin slit of white ball beneath. It's been touch and go with him, said I, but he'll live now. Just open that window and hand me the water carafe. I undid his collar and poured the cold water over his face, and raised and sank his arms until he drew a long, natural breath. It's only a question of time now, said I as I turned away from him. Holmes stood by the table with his hands deep in his pockets, and his chin upon his breast. I suppose we ought to call the police in now, said he. And yet, I confess that I'd like to give them a complete case when they come. It's a blessed mystery to me, cried Pycroft, scratching his head. Whatever they wanted to bring me all the way up here for, then... Pooh, it is all clear enough, said Holmes impatiently. This is a sudden last move. You understand it, then? I think it is rather obvious. What do you say, Watson? I shrugged my shoulders. I must confess that I am out of my depth, said I. Oh, surely if you consider the events at first, they can only point to one conclusion. What do you make of them? Well, the whole thing hinges upon 2 points. The first is the making of Pycroft write declarations by which he entered the service of a prosperous company. Do you not see how very suggestive that is? I am afraid I missed the point. Well, why do they want him to do it? Not a business matter, for these arrangements are usually verbal. and there's no earthly business reason why they should be an exception. Don't you see, my young friend, that they are very anxious to obtain a specimen of your handwriting, and had no other way to do it? And why? Quite so. Why? When they answer that we have made some progress with our little problem, why? There can be only one adequate reason. Someone wanted to learn to imitate your writing, and had to procure a specimen of it first. And now, if we pass on the second point, we find that each throws light upon the other. That point is a request made by Piner that you should not resign your place, but should leave your manager of this important business in the full expectation that Mr. Hall Pycroft, whom he had never seen, was about to enter the office upon Monday morning. "My God!" cried our client. "What a blind beetle I've been!" Blind beetle. Now you see the point of the handwriting. Suppose that someone turned up at your place and wrote a completely different hand from that which you had applied for the vacancy. Of course the game would have been up. But in the interval the rogue had learned to imitate you, and his position was therefore secure, as I presume that nobody in the office had ever set eyes upon you. "Not so!" cried Hall Pycroft. "Very good. Of course, it was of most importance to prevent you from thinking better of it, and also keep you from coming into contact with anyone who might tell you the double was your work in Mawson's office. Therefore, they gave you a handsome advance on your salary, and ran you off to Midlands, where they gave you enough work to do to prevent you from going to London, where you might have burst a little game up. That is plain enough. But why should this man pretend to be his own brother?" "Well, that is pretty clear also. There are evidently only two of them in it, the others impersonating you at the office. This one acted as your engager, and then found that he could not find your employer without admitting a third person to the plot. That he was most unwilling to do. He changed his appearance as far as he could, and trusted that the likeness which you could not fail to observe would be put down as a family resemblance. But for the happy chance of the gold stuffing, your suspicions would probably never have been aroused." Old Pycroft shook his clenched fist in the air. "Good Lord!" he cried. "Well, I've been fooled by this way. What was the other Hall Pycroft doing in the Masons? What should we do, Mr. Holmes? Tell me what to do." "We must wire to Mawson's. They shut at 12 on Sundays. Never mind, there will be some doorkeeper in attendance." "Ah, yes, they do keep a permanent guard there on the account of the value of the securities that they hold. I remember hearing it talked of in the city." "Very good. We shall wire him and see if all is well, and if a clerk of your name is working there. That is clear enough. But what is not clear is why, at sight of us, one of the rogues should instantly walk out of the room and hang himself." "The paper!" croaked a man behind us. The man sitting up, blanched and ghastly, with returning reason in his eyes, and hands which rubbed nervously at the broad red band which encircled his throat. "The paper, of course!" yelled Holmes in a paroxysm of excitement. "Idiot that I was! I thought so much of our visits that the paper had never entered my mind in an instant. To be sure, the secret must lie there." He flattened it out upon the table, and a cry of triumph burst from his lips. "Look at this, Watson!" he cried. "It is a London paper, an early edition of the Evening Standard. Here is what we want. Look at the headlines. 'Crime in the City. Murder at Watson's and Williams. Gigantic attempted robbery. Capture of the criminal.' Here, Watson, we are all equally anxious to hear, so kindly read aloud to us." It appeared at one position in the paper to have been one event of importance in its own, and the account of it ran rather this way. "An desperate attempt at robbery, culminating in the death of one man and the capture of the criminal, occurred this afternoon in the city. For some time back, Mawson and Williams, the famous financial house, have been the guardians of securities which amount to the aggregate of the sum of considerably over 1 million sterling. So conscientious was the manager of the responsibility which he devoted upon him, the consequence of great interest at stake in safes of the very latest construction have been employed, and an armed watchman was left day and night in the building. It appears that last week a new clerk named Hall Pycroft was engaged by the firm. This person appears to have been none other than Bennington, the famous forger and cracksman, who, with his brother, has also recently emerged from 5 years' spell of penal servitude. By some means which are not yet clear, he succeeded in winning under a false name this official position in the office, which he utilized in order to obtain moldings of various locks, and thorough knowledge of the position of the strong room and of the safes. It is customary at Mawson's for the clerks to leave at midday on Saturday. Sergeant Tucson of the city police was somewhat surprised, therefore, to see a gentleman with a carpet bag come down the steps at 20 minutes past 1. His suspicions being aroused, the sergeant followed the man, and with the aid of Constable Pollock succeeded, after a most desperate resistance, in arresting him. It was clear at once that the darling and gigantic robbery had been committed. Nearly £100,000 worth of American railway bonds, with a large amount of crisp mines and companies, was discovered in the bag. On examining the premises, the body of the unfortunate watchman was found, doubled up and thrust into the largest of the safes, where it would not have been discovered until Monday morning, had it not been for the prompt action of the Sergeant Tucson. The man's skull had been shattered by a blow from the robber delivered from behind. There could be no doubt that Bennington had obtained entrance by pretending that he had left something behind, and having murdered the watchman, rapidly rifled through the large safe, and then made off with his booty. His brother, who usually works with him, has not appeared on this job, as far as can presently be attained, although the police are making energetic inquiries to his whereabouts. Well, we may solve the police a little trouble in that direction, said Holmes, glancing at the haggard figure huddled up in the window. Human nature is a strange mixture, Watson. You see that even a villain and murderer can inspire such affection that his brother turns to suicide when he learns that his neck is forfeited. However, we have no choices as to our actions. The doctor and I will remain on guard, Mr. Pycroft, if you will have the kindness to step out for the police.